learned that where's my finger? We have the same light. How does that even happen? I don't understand. That's crazy.
We're kindred souls.
There is something happening here. I don't understand it, but I'll do my best. Well, welcome everybody to the live. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you guys don't know who Mack is, I was so excited to bring him on, and I thought I'd found something I was going to share with you guys that you didn't already know about. I remember posting in my community tab. I said, "Hey, I found this really cool channel. I'm going to do a live with this guy," and about 80% of you were like, "Did you just find Mack like now?" Because we've known about him for a while. But just in case a few moose ignorant individuals in the chat don't know who you are, would you mind just giving us a brief intro and we'll go from there?
Yeah, my name's Mac. I own Midwest Magic Cleaning, and I clean basically hoarder houses for free. And it's not just people with hoarding disorder; it's people with severe ADHD, PTSD, elemental P, and pretty much all of the letters. And it's people who aren't just not cleaning because they don't want to clean. It's people who have some mental disabilities that prevent them from getting over that hurdle. So my thing is I come in, I film the cleanup, I put it on YouTube. YouTube gets paid, I get paid, and then they get sometimes upwards of a $10,000-15,000 cleanup for free. Because professionally, a lot of those cleanups would be, I've seen some as high as $20,000. And so everybody wins. And then I get to discuss things like hoarding disorder and how ADHD and certain mental afflictions and disorders can really severely physically impact somebody's life.
And that obviously is my favorite part of your channel. And the way I was kind of conceptualizing it in my head, I don't know if you ever watched the show Top Gear, the Grand Tour.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like it seems like it's a car show, but it's actually a comedy show, and cars just happen to be what it's centered around. And that's kind of how I see
Yeah.
your channel. Is like your channel is a mental health channel. Cleaning is just the thing. It's like the wrapper that the mental health information comes in. And I know we were talking the other day. We've been catching up on each other's content. I got to be honest with you. Watching a bunch of your content kind of put me in my place a little bit on a couple things because I don't know what this is about my brain. Put me in a room with like a suicidal person, an angry person, a jaded, disenchanted person, someone who hates their life, hates the world. I'm all about it. But if that person makes a pile of their clothes on the ground, something in my brain goes, I can't help you. I don't know what's wrong with me, but the amount of just respect and empathy that you have for people who are, it's like you're strong where I'm weak because you're good at dealing with all the things that I really struggle to understand. And it's like when I see these houses that you clean up, I can't help but think like that's the kind of thing that most people would run away from, right? Is
Yeah. It's one of those where when I grew up, if your room was messy, you were called lazy or a slob, right? And it's kind of the natural reaction because you don't intuitively know that there's something else going on there. And I've never said that those people don't exist. Those people do exist where they're just like, I don't care. My house can be whatever it wants to be. But being like the first reaction to call all people lazy or slobs like that is a lack of empathy, which I think a lot of people misunderstand or confuse empathy with sympathy or for
Mhm.
excusing. And so my big thing on my channel above everything else is to teach people about just understanding how the house got into that condition and how the person got into that mindset, because you can't fix a problem if you don't understand the problem. And lazy is not a problem that I'm interested in dealing with. I'm interested in dealing with people who say, I don't want to live like this. I'm trying my heart out and I just cannot make myself do it.
What you just said there, like how did the house get into this condition? See, that's what I love about you. And that's kind of how I approach things like depression and anxiety too. And like, yeah, they can to some degree, like pieces of them can come out of nowhere, but usually you can kind of reverse engineer like some sequence of events happen, whether internally or externally in this person's life that took them down this pathway. And if we really want to understand what happened and how we can help this person, we have to know the story. We have to know the chain of events that brought us here, and then figure out how to undo some of those changes, basically. And I love that you do that. Like watching your cleans is just fascinating because it's not, like I said, it's not just a cleaning video. It's like you're going through the whole psychology and like emotional journey that brought them to that point, and how you
Yeah.
handle each person's space is customized to their story and their needs. Like I was watching your ADHD one a little bit ago. Your ADHD one, like there's only one. I'm sure you have a ton of those, but and you had such a different approach to that because you weren't getting rid of stuff, and you were making sure that people that they were going to know where the stuff was. It was just like, I'm just trying to help them tidy up a little bit, and that's totally different than how you'd approach like a house that's been hoarded, right?
Right. So, well, especially with ADHD, they deal with object permanence
Mhm.
issues. And so they may have a pile of mail on the table and 90% of it may be junk mail. But unless they see it and touch it, it ceases to exist. Like if I were to take that pile of mail and put it in a folder and keep it exactly where it was, just because it's in a folder, it now ceases to exist and it sets off kind of a panic. And I'm always trying kind of careful about how I phrase it to people because obviously not all ADHD people are like that. It just happens to be in those situations, ADHD is oftentimes the culprit. And so I will clean those houses differently than I clean somebody who has actual hoarding disorder because with somebody with ADHD, oftentimes I can get rid of stuff that I know is junk mail. But with hoarding disorder, that's such a severe disorder that there can be an emotional connection to even the junk mail that is just kind of a miswiring in the brain that throwing that away would be equal to throwing away $100 bill. And it's not just monetary value. There's an emotional connection to stuff, which would be on par to throwing away someone's pet. And that can cause not just panic, but it can cause, just like an addiction, a relapse or an exacerbation of that disorder. So understanding what you're going into is 100% key because some houses we throw a lot of stuff away. Other houses we just kind of play house Tetris and just restack stuff up in a way that gets it out of the floor paths. And that way they can, without treatment, they're not going to get better, but they can, with treatment, slowly start to go through that one tub at a time and say, do I need this? Do I want this? Does it make me happy? Is it going to burden my kids when I pass away to have to go through all this stuff? That's a big one.
Now with hoarded houses, I've heard you describe their connection to their possessions. I've heard you use a couple different comparisons. In one video, you said like these people have emotions to the things in their house that would be similar to what another person might have for like a pet, or maybe in some cases even like a person. How do you? First of all, I heard that and I'm like, okay, I have two graduate degrees in clinical psychology. I've been in this field for 15 years. I did however many. I've never heard anyone put it that way, and I've never understood hoarding disorder. And like, maybe it's a stretch to say I understand it now, but I understand it much better now than I did before because of that metaphor. How do you figure out stuff like that? Is it conversation with the people, or like where does that knowledge come from for you?
So part of is experience. I grew up around people with hoarding disorder. Part of it is I've been studying psychology and abnormal psychology since the early 90s. I'm also autistic and I love to figure out the way things work. And I kind of had a knack for figuring out the way the human brain works, at least in certain aspects. And being able to describe it to the average person was a thing I had a knack for. It's kind of a green thumb with explaining it to just average people. Hoarding disorder is one of those things that's hard to explain because they're still learning about it. So even as far as say 5 years ago, they thought that it was just a cousin of OCD. And then once they started doing brain scans and finding the activity centers that light up and don't light up, um, they found that hoarding disorder was its own separate entity and classified it as its own disorder. And so watching that study change over time makes me continue to learn about it because there's still, it's such a mystery area of the brain. So when I when the light bulb went off for me was when I heard a doctor, and I can't remember his name, talk about the neuropsychological disorder itself and the physical problems with the two frontal lobes in the brain. So you've got one side that regulates like heavy emotion, or specifically emotional regulation. And then the other part that is it deals with heavy decision making. And there's almost when you put them under a brain scan, those lobes have severely diminished activity compared to the average person. And then there's a crosswire that happens where the decision making and emotional connection kind of crosswire. And so that's where the whole idea of them attaching emotional connection to the objects comes in because the brain is confusing the two. And the only way to get past that is with treatment because there's no cure for hoarding disorder, but you can rewrite neural pathways by practice and repetition over and over and over. And sometimes that takes years and years to get the most basic things down, like throwing away a box that is a really good box. Like you get a cardboard box and you're like, "Ah, I know this is trash, but man, that's a really good cardboard box. I could use that for Christmas gifts or whatever." In the case of a hoarder, it could be something as simple as I've got a frying pan that is rusted completely through, but I can't let go of it, even though it's clearly trash.
Now, this is just, I already kind of know how we both feel about this because we chatted about it a little before. So I'm asking this somewhat rhetorically, but why does taking care of our spaces matter so much? Like, why is that a mental health related activity to take good care of the place you live? I know I've got my take on it too, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah. So I think it's you can split it right down the middle between physical and emotional. So for me, um, I just am calmer when there's no dishes in the sink. So psychologically, whenever I go into a living room and it's nice and orderly, I can sit down and take a breath and say, thanks, past me. You kind of gave me a gift, and now I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. And I just like the order. Physically, what I don't think a lot of people realize is that the body is designed to release the same type of chemicals that we use for antidepressants with most muscle motion. And they've measured that, and I can't remember what the chemical is, but it's the same basic concept of as your muscles physically contract, it releases those endorphins or hormones or whatever they are, dopamine or whatever they are. And it's self-treatment, just getting yourself in motion. So a lot of the times with depression, I have to tell myself, step one is put your feet on the floor. Don't, there's a cat here floating right away. um, but yeah, just
Happens.
it sucks. I don't want to do it. I don't want to get up. But step one is literally step one. And put your feet on the floor, and we'll worry about step two once that happens. And then once I get into motion, I just start feeling better and better. And even though I may not be cured or the depression goes away, at least I have a thing where I start to feel average again, like normal for I know you hate that word as much as I do, the
I
word
do.
normal,
You're
but
right.
yeah.
The chemical you're referring to there, I believe, if it's a mouthful, but this was my doctoral dissertation was physical activity and depression. Phenylethylamine, I think is how
Oh,
you
okay.
say it. I may be saying that wrong. I'm not sure. So something I heard you say there that was really interesting to me is that you're able to experience a sense of like gratitude for your past self when you see your space looking generally the way you want it to. And that's something I see a lot of people struggle with. This feedback loop that I don't mean to say it like they're doing something wrong because they don't do it on purpose, but that I catch people in is, they'll have the dishes in the sink for 3 days, right? Or the laundry on the floor or whatever. And then on day three, whether it's through a spontaneous burst of motivation or just a change in like strategy, they manage to get it done. They get those dishes clean, they get them put away, they get the laundry put away. They finally accomplish that task that took however long. And as soon as it's done, usually in their head, sometimes out loud, they say, "Well, why did that take me so long?" Or like, "What's wrong with me that took 3 days?" And from operant conditioning, I almost said classical conditioning, from an operant conditioning standpoint, what you accidentally do when you engage in that mental pattern is you just punish yourself for doing the thing you've been trying to get yourself to do. And that actually decreases your motivation to engage in that behavior the next time because you essentially associate doing the dishes with basically getting yelled at. Like, and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter that it comes from you. You feel criticism and shame in response to task completion, and that decreases the frequency of the behavior. That's how you extinguish a behavior. And
Yes.
I don't know, is that some did you have to, like, cultivate that for yourself, or is that something that just comes naturally to you, that appreciation of, like, "I did this?"
I talked about this on a video not too long ago where I talked about rephrasing your perspective on what you're doing as far as like your housework and your motivation. So some people have tried this on videos, but they don't take it far enough. They say instead of I have to do the dishes, they say I get to do the dishes, but that's kind of ridiculous. Nobody is like, yay, I get to do the dishes.
Yes.
What you're do instead is I focus on the outcome. So I get to have a clean sink. I get to have a clear kitchen. I get to have a living room that I can relax in. If I don't feel like cooking, I don't say I get to cook. I say I get to have a really awesome meal tonight. And so focusing on the outcome gets you motivated through the process. So whenever you talked about the self punishment, I do see that a lot. And I see a whole lot of people who have an aversion to cleaning because their parents use cleaning as a punishment.
Yeah.
And so it was you were late, so you have to do the dishes this week. Um, I need to you go clean your room right now, and don't come out until everything is completely done. So they didn't make it an activity as a means of existing. They used it as a punishment for doing something wrong. So you associate it with that negative feeling, and now you try to avoid it as an adult, and you don't know how to get past it because your brain has created those neural pathways that say cleaning bad.
Yeah, exactly. I have kinda I do a very s I get to the same point with a different set of operations, I guess, in my mind. For a long time, I would just my way of organizing how I'd spend my time throughout the day would basically just be to ask myself questions like, "What do I wanna do right now?" And I found that that question is a trap, along the lines of motivation. If I just ask and answer, "What do I feel like doing right now?" The answer is almost always gonna be something that's acutely pleasurable, and that's it. Like, I wanna do something that
Yeah,
makes me feel, I wanna watch TV, I wanna play video games, I wanna go eat a pizza. And if I ask myself, like, do I want to do the dishes? The answer 99% of the time is going to be no, right? Every now and then you have that spontaneous moment where you're like, I actually kind of feel like doing this, but those moments are few and far between. And so for me, I found that changing the question that I ask has helped me get around my own brain in a lot of those circumstances. If I'm in a reasonably okay mood, then like you said, focusing on the outcome tends to be the question I ask. So like, what do I want my kitchen to look like? And if I want my
yes,
kitchen to look neat and tidy and clean, well, there's only one road that leads to that outcome. And so that's the road I have to travel if I want to get to that destination. Whether or not I enjoy traveling the road isn't necessarily the most important question to answer. Now, I have a whole second layer of processing that I use here, and that's when I'm extremely like depressed or anhedonic. If you guys aren't familiar with that term, anhedonia is a common symptom of depression where you have diminished or even like non-existent ability to feel joy, reward, pleasure, achievement, etc. And so nothing feels good. You don't want to do anything, and you might not even care about your kitchen being clean or not because it may not emotionally feel any different to you in that moment than a dirty kitchen. And so the other question that I go to sometimes is, what kind of person do I want to be? Because I found that my desired identity is a pretty stable, consistent thing that doesn't really change with my mood. Whereas my desired emotional state is something that is very, very mood dependent. Um,
yeah,
Now, I remember something else you said in our little pregame too was you were talking about motivation. Obviously, motivation's adjacent to mood. Um, what? Surely you don't always feel like cleaning, right? So,
yeah,
how do you get
yeah.
around
And
that on those days when you're just like, I do not want to see one single dish today? How do you get around that?
so there are times where there's a couple different ways that I think about it. The first is like if you are, let's take ADHD for example. We've got somebody who looks around the house and says, "This is overwhelming. I don't want to deal with it today." And but if they're at work and their job is to keep their stuff clean, their desk area clean, they're really good at it because they have to do it. So there's one part of me that accesses that to say, look, you just have to do it. But that is, in my experience, one of the worst ways to do it because, again, you're kind of punishing yourself for it. I'm making myself do this thing. But whenever I have those really bad days, I go back to the feet on the floor method, which is I find that if my kitchen is in the worst condition it's ever been, if I force myself to move just one thing, and I'm not even talking about cleaning it or putting it away or anything, just grabbing a cup and moving it from this shelf to this shelf, that motion kind of kickstarts my brain. And then my brain just automatically kind of pops into, okay, we're doing this now. And it's the same thing with, instead of doing the dishes, I'm not looking at it as I'm doing the dishes right now. All I'm thinking about is I'm running some dishwater. I don't have a, by the way, I don't have a dishwasher. That's part of my autism thing. They freak me
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And so but it's the same thing. I'm not going to do the dishes. I'm just going to start rinsing them off and putting them in the dishwasher. That next step is future me's problem. But by the time you get doing that, you're just kind of, your brain gets into that mindset of we're in work mode now without you even having to tell it anything. And before you know it, you're like, yeah, while I'm here, I'll just go ahead and knock out this. I'll wipe down the shelf or whatever. But there are parts, I still deal with depression. I'm on medication for it. And I do have days where I have to tell myself, you're not getting up out of bed. You're just sitting up. You're just putting your feet on the floor. And then while I'm here, since my feet are on the floor, I might as well stand up. And then you're right, like in 90-day goals just said momentum. And that's what it's all about for me is getting the ball rolling. And then once it's rolling, it's kind of hard to stop. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to go through the day and be super me and go and clean everything from top to bottom. But sometimes that small victories are can be the biggest victories because it takes more effort to even start walking on a bad day than it does to clean your whole house on a good day because it's all up here and not, on the guns.
Right. Well, it's Newton's first law, right? Actually, someone mentioned it in the chat and stole my thunder. I promise I was going to say it anyway. I'm not just stealing your idea, but an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and an object at rest tends to stay at rest. So, a lot of times, if you could, like you said, if you can just get yourself in motion, once you start, you probably won't mind continuing to go for a while. And when you hit the point where you do mind, well, that's when you take a break, right? And um, I do think there's tremendous value into just looking at the individual action steps that make up the whole thing. I'm currently working on writing my second book right now, and it's the same experience every time where I sit down with a blank Word document, and my brain's like, okay, at some point this has to be 50,000 words, and I'm just like, stare at it in despair for an hour, and then I write an outline. I say, okay, so this book is 7 chapters. Each chapter has 3 sections, plus there's an intro and a conclusion. So really, each section is only like 4,000 words. And if I have
Mhm.
5 or 6 ideas in there and expand it out, then before I know it, I'm like, oh, I'm writing now. And it's like anything like that, if you can do, now you got to be careful. You don't want to, if you consider each, I hear people talk about breaking down each individual action, but like you could overdo that. I think it's not like
Yeah.
I will move my hand in a clockwise motion with the rag 7,000 times. Like, don't go too far with it. But if there's no individual element of the overall task that you cannot do, then you can do the whole thing. And it's just a
Yeah.
matter of putting those steps together in like a procedural manner, right? Is that kind
Yeah.
of
I
in
get
alignment with what you? Yeah.
Yeah, I get questions all the time from people who have severe hoarding disorder, and they're like, "No, I'm willing to get rid of the stuff. I'm willing to take the next step, but I don't have anybody to help me, and I'm in North Carolina or California, so I'm not there to go in and just reset button them." And so they're like, "Where? What? How do I even start?" I'm like, "Well, you're not. You have to remember, you're not cleaning the kitchen. Your steps are 3 feet at a time. That's your thing." You're not cleaning the kitchen, you're cleaning a 3 foot by 3 foot section of countertop. And after that, take a break, even if you don't need one. Just walk away from it, grab something to drink, take a deep breath, come back and work on the next 3 foot section. So I always tell them 3 feet at a time. Now that's for the most severe cases. But I think that even works for if you're doing a maintenance clean on your house and you don't feel like it. That you can take bigger bites because it's not as messy, but again, you're not cleaning the kitchen, you're wiping down just the countertop with your sink on it, so you can take bigger bites. But, I think that breaking it down like that, and you're right, within reason, um, you don't have to break it down to, I'm now getting the rag out of the drawer and I'm now going to get it wet. But just breaking it down into bite-sized pieces changes your perception so much that it's not easy, but it's easier to get the momentum rolling whenever you do that.
Well, it's like a lot of things. Like it's not easy, but it's simple, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not a complicated thing to get your mind around. Just getting yourself to actually act on the steps that you know in your mind are the ones you should take. That's the challenge. But a lot of times I think we can be really good at like outthinking ourselves and spinning around in circles and not taking that first action step. And something I hear people say a lot, and I don't want to push too hard on this, but I have some feelings about it. Is, when people say that their living space is a reflection of their mental state, right? And I that's absolutely true. But sometimes I hear people say that in a way, and obviously I'm not talking about people with hoarding disorder, but I sometimes hear people say that in a way that almost suggests like helplessness, like, well, because I
Yes.
feel the way I do, that means I cannot change this because this is just an outward manifestation of who I am. And my take on that, at least, is that that's actually a cyclical relationship. And yes, your mental state and your emotional state does affect the way you interact with and care for your environment. But your environment also interacts your mental and emotional state. And I saw a study recently that suggested that um, I don't know exactly how they defined clutter. They must have operationalized it somehow, but that a highly cluttered environment actually keeps our sympathetic nervous system in more of a fight or flight state in a way that's comparable to, I was going to say being chased by a bear. I guess we should say moose just to keep it on theme. But is that consistent with like do you think that by changing your environment to some degree we can actually like impact our thoughts and emotions in a cyclical manner?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the problem with cyclical problems is that you have to chop off part of that. Like you have to cut the circle and you have to make a change that stops that cycle. And so even if you don't feel like it, sometimes you have to get up and do the thing your brain is screaming at you to not do in order to kill that cycle. And so, yes, I get a lot of people who don't clean their house because they're depressed, but they're depressed because their house is messy, which makes them more depressed, which makes the house more messy. And then before you
Mhm.
know it, you've got the houses that, especially in PTSD cases and severe ADHD, that's where I'm renting a dumpster and filling a 40-yard dumpster worth of stuff. And so I do see it a lot. And I do see that if I can give them a reset button and they start seeing the house as something they can maintain rather than something they have to fix, sometimes that does work. And sometimes I just intervened in one that was a grandmother with compulsive spending. And
Mm.
she had gotten custody of her three granddaughters. One of the granddaughters had had fetal alcohol syndrome and is getting much better now. But then the other two are autistic. And so they had functionality problems. And the grandmother, in order to compensate, just bought way too much stuff. Well, then it got into that cyclical thing where the house was so cluttered, it caused depression, and then the depression caused, and back and forth. Um, what in the world? I'm so sorry.
It's okay. No, I hear
Uh,
something happening there. You got a cat terrorizing your
yeah,
house?
I'm going to go check that real
Yeah,
quick. I
you
think the
go
room's
ahead. You
into
check it
something.
out. That sounded.
Oh, okay. I got you. All right. No, I thought the cats were into something. I have a guy who was going to fix my kitchen, so he's like
Oh,
bringing
okay.
in drywall.
Yeah, no
So,
worries.
okay. But yeah, the cyclical thing that once we broke her of that cycle or stepped in and helped her break the cycle, she got so much better that her compulsive spending almost ended. She got to the point to where she's like, okay, this is out of hand. I can see where it had gotten so bad that I needed a dumpster, and we're throwing away things that we can't donate because they've been used, and certain donation places don't take those sorts of things. And it just became a thing where we're just throwing thousands of dollars of stuff in the trash, and that reset button helped. In a lot of cases, without therapy, all we're doing is just kind of putting an end to the physical thing, and then it will get back into that condition at some point. The relapse rate on stuff like that is about the same as addiction, where about a 90% relapse rate. So when people ask me all the time, aren't you afraid it's just going to get trashed again? My answer is no, because we did what we were supposed to do. We helped intervene, we helped clean up, we helped break the cycle. And then it's up to them after that whether they can continue that or get therapy. And if we even gave them 2 weeks worth of peace, to me, that's worth the effort.
Absolutely. On the topic of vicious cycles too, any vicious cycle, when you find yourself in one of those like downward spirals, something I encourage people to look for a lot is there's got to be a way out, right? But in order to find the way out, we have to look at where you have the most agency, because that's your exit point from the cycle. So if we're in a cycle of depression and deteriorating, physical space and environment around us, well, where's your point of greatest agency there? If one of those things has to change to start the other one changing, do you have the ability today to stop being depressed? Like, no, of course not, right? There's no direct mechanism for you to just say, well, I just won't be depressed today. Like that's there is literally nothing you can do to just force that outcome to occur. Can you do some work in your living space while you're depressed? Technically, yes. It is really freaking hard. It will probably be much less enjoyable than under other circumstances. It might feel like literal torture at times, but you can do it. It is at least biologically possible to do that. Whereas just snapping your fingers and saying, "Oh, I feel better now," we don't have an action step to achieve that. And one of the terms I've used, it's ironically I've never seen the movie Inception, but I understand it well enough to make all kinds of weird metaphors about it. Is I encourage people to harness what I call apathyception, which is when you're in the depths of that depression and that despair, and you just don't care about anything. You don't care about your home. You don't care about your body. You don't care about the dishes. Okay, but can you not care about not caring? Because the premise that you have to care about those things to do them is, in my opinion, like there's a deeper level of not caring, and you can harness that level of not caring to do it anyway. Like if I accept that today I'm going to be depressed today, and that is just that's like a fact of my life right now, and there's nothing by the end of the day that's going to make me not depressed, then if that's just a reality, then my decision tree goes to the next action. So I can be depressed and have no clean dishes, or I can be depressed and have clean dishes. And what I really want is to not be depressed. But if there's no option for that, I'll take the consolation prize of like, well, I can at least be depressed and have clean dishes.
Yeah, I knew a guy. I don't know anybody else who's ever done this, so I don't know if it works or if it just worked for him. But he used to tell me that if he got into super deep depression, he always thought of it as like a monster on his shoulder, and he would do some stuff just out of spite. Like
Yeah.
his brain is screaming at him to sit down and play video games or whatever, and he's just like out of sheer spite, I'm going to do the dishes or whatever.
Mhm.
And with me, I've got those days where it's hard for me to get up and motivated. And so physically, I found there's two things that I can do that can help change not the perspective, but at least the mood. And that is opening up the curtains and getting some light in, because depression always, for some reason, loves dark rooms. So it's almost like warding it off like a vampire. Just open
Yeah.
it up and then find the happiest, bounciest, most ridiculous music I can find and put it on. And this is kind of my way to decompress, even if I'm not doing anything. And it seems to kind of get my blood flowing at least a little bit. And I'm sure part of that is just the action of me going to the windows and opening them up and making myself move. But I think one of the things we talked about that I think is super, super important for people to understand is they confuse motivation with excitement
Yeah.
or artistic inspiration. I'm waiting to be inspired to clean or waiting to get excited about cleaning my house. And if you're waiting for that, it's likely never going to happen. Like you can talk to an artist and say, how do you get inspired to do all these things? And somebody who does art for a living, if they're being honest, will tell you, I have to create because I'm a creator, and I have to pay my rent. Like at some point, I have to create because that's what I do for a living. even if I don't want to. But there are very few artistic pieces out there that were made because they were hit by a sudden electrical bolt of inspiration. It's because they sat down and they thought about art and they thought about presentation and the idea they wanted to get across, and they put intellectual motion into that. And I think people think of motivation as being something it's not, as something that it's more spiritual or a feeling of excitement, when in reality, you already have motivation to clean your kitchen. You look in there and you say, I want to clean my kitchen. That's the motivation.
Right.
The excitement is something totally different. There's a good chance you'll never feel the excitement about cleaning your kitchen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that confusion I think is really important. And it's something that I try to impart on people in my audience because it's such a common misconception.
Mm. The way I've addressed low motivation, which obviously is something all people face from time to time, is like I think of it, of course, I would, as like a math equation, basically, where if motivation equals effort compared to reward, right? And that's why,
Mhm.
because a lot of people I work with, it's like they have these really challenging jobs that would freak most people out, for example, and then again, stereotypical example, they go home and they can't do the dishes, and they're like, why can I do this thing that is like a 8 out of 10 on the difficulty, but then I can't do my laundry? And it's because your job is very rewarding, whether that's financially or otherwise. Like you've been doing this for long enough that that the time and energy you put into it, that you're going to get it reciprocated in some way. But when there's a part of your life where you're struggling to have consistency, you don't necessarily trust that it's going to be worth your while. Like maybe you don't remember the last time you had a clean kitchen, so you legitimately don't remember what it feels like. And so when your
Mhm.
brain is trying to predict, well, I know it would be a lot of work, but how good would I feel when I did it? What you might get back in return is like, I don't know. Like that's just kind of a big question mark in my brain. So when it's something when it's something new, when it's something you haven't been in the routine of for a while, there's always kind of this awkward like leap of faith stage where you have to do the thing and you're not sure if it's going to be worth it yet. And the only way you get to the point where you can maybe be in a stage of maintenance, with your living space, with your kitchen, with your whatever, is by getting over that hump and getting to the point where your brain, sees that outcome and says, okay, you know what? This actually does help me a lot. This actually does feel quite good. Now I start to feel like a natural intrinsic pull to keep doing this thing. But if it's something that you do very sporadically, and again, if you kind of punish yourself after doing it, like we talked about before, then no, your brain's not going to release a ton of feel good chemicals when you consider doing that thing, because it just doesn't have enough data to prove to you that, like, oh yeah, you'll definitely feel awesome after you do that.
There's a perfect example of that, and this is not really a question that I get every week, but it's a statement that I get every week, which is I can clean for somebody else with no problem. I can walk into my friend's house and clean their house top to bottom, and it's awesome. But I can't get home and clean my own. Why is that? And the reason is simpler than people think. Cleaning for your friend is a gift. Cleaning for yourself is a chore, and
Mm,
that's all perception. And the solution to that is to genuinely think of the outcomes of what you're doing for yourself as a gift to yourself. Because with your friend, there's not just the gift of giving them something that shows you care, like, hey, I want to help you out and take some stress off your plate. Let me do your dishes. Let me clean the kitchen. And then, you can fold all their laundry, you can do everything and not even get exhausted because you're mentally in it. Whenever you get back to your house, you're like, crap, I have to do the dishes. I have to do my laundry. But over time, if you say it enough to say, I get to have all my outfits that I love at my disposal for tomorrow, and not I have to do the laundry. Tomorrow, when I wake up, I can wear my favorite outfit because it's clean. That is giving yourself the same gift you were giving your friend. And part of that other thing for the friend is also there's an impression standard too, right? So you're not only helping your friend, you're trying to impress them with what you're doing. You're kind of treating it like a reality show where the family goes out on a vacation and then while they're gone, you flip their house or whatever. You're
yeah.
kind of doing that with cleaning too. But if you can get to that mental state where you're doing it for yourself, eventually you will start thinking like that because repetition breeds habit.
That is a very powerful reframe. And at first I was thinking that's different than how I approach it. I actually think fundamentally it's the same. We're just using different terminology. But that same dilemma, right? I can do this for other people, but not for me. I've often thought of that as maybe a reflection of your relationship with that person. Like, well,
Yeah.
I'll go help Mac clean his place because I like Mac. But then I go home to my place, it's just me. Well, I don't like me, so I don't want to do nice things. I don't care about me. I don't want to do nice things for me. But then when you, at the risk of overcomplicating it, if you work on forming a healthy relationship with past and future versions of yourself, like this temporal congruence, for lack of a better term, then you can start to put yourself in that circle of people who you actually care about. And that I
Yes.
think makes it a lot easier to do nice things for yourself if you don't see yourself as like just this other, this outside person, like, oh, I don't like that guy, he sucks or whatever. If you give gifts for yourself, this is where I think we actually have the same theory and we're just describing it differently. Because acts of service, right, is one of the ways you can strengthen a relationship with a person. And so if you're consistently doing kind things for yourself, that can help strengthen that relationship to where, like, you wake up in a house that you're kind of happy in and you think, oh, I did something nice for me. And it'll create goodwill, like internal goodwill for you, just as it would if, like, I'm sure when you show up and help people out with their places, I'm sure they're immensely grateful to you. But we can be that person for ourselves too. It just kind of requires, again, like a little bit of leap of faith. Like, well, I don't care about me now, but maybe if I start treating me and my space better, maybe that's how I bridge that gap. And it actually makes me think of this is a weird story, but I think you'll get it. I had this, he was like a friend of a friend. I didn't know him super well. This guy was, well, he wasn't necessarily wealthy. He was like 20 years old, but this is a long time ago. His parents were absurdly wealthy. And I was at his house, and they had like this underground garage with a bunch of like luxury supercars and stuff like that. And it's just ridiculous. And I remember, I mean, I was like awestruck, but I remember asking him which one it was his favorite. And he got really thoughtful about it. And then he goes, "Follow me." And I'm like, "Oh, what? Like, there's another, like, is there another layer under it, like more cars?" But actually, he ended up taking us out to the street, and on the street, he had like a mid '90s Mazda RX-7, which is a cool car. Don't get me wrong, but like this garage is full of like Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all this stuff. And he's like, "Believe it or not, this is my favorite car." And at first, I'm like, "No, I don't believe it. Like, that doesn't make any sense. What's wrong with you?" But over the course of talking with him about it, basically what we got to is he had really customized that car. He'd done a lot of work on it. He did his own oil changes. He changed the seats and everything. Like, he had invested time and energy in this car. And so, although it was not objectively, the fastest or the most luxurious or the most expensive, it was the one he had the strongest personal connection to. I believe, this is just my theory, but because of the resources he invested into it. When you put a lot of time and energy into something, you end up caring tremendously about that thing. Like Jason, for example, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I run into a lot in hoarding disorder is that they can tell you the stories behind almost everything that they bought or everything that they've saved. I got this from my aunt in 1983 for a birthday present or whatever. And the time and the story that's connected with that strengthens that personal connection with the item. So
Mm.
some of the worst places that are the most frustrating and difficult places that I have to do have that personal connection to the item, which in a healthy person can be cool. Like the Mazda thing, I totally get that because that's hands-on connection that you have with that car, and so that's why it strengthens it. Then in somebody with hoarding disorder, that happens with things that are literally garbage. And so I haven't thrown away this McDonald's bag because I went on a date, in 1982 with my boyfriend, and this is where we went, and I'm still saving this. And it may be laying in piles of other McDonald's bags, but for some reason they picked that one out and can't get rid of it. That happens a lot. That's an extreme hypothetical, but the one of the houses I cleaned recently, the guy's got over 1,000 knives in his house.
Mm.
And he's made personal connections with all of them because he went there and physically got them, and he searched down these, and he's attached, instead of just an emotional attachment, he's attached an unrealistic monetary value to all of them.
Sure.
So one of the reasons I bring that up is because if that same guy with the Mazda went to resell it, he probably couldn't put a physical price on it because there's so much more than the value of the car attached to it. Same thing with this guy with the knives. He's got a knife that may be worth $2.50, but in his head, there's such an attachment that he couldn't sell it for under 100. And unrealistically, now whenever he passes, his kids are probably going to sell all those for like $100 in
Yeah.
one giant lot.
And that
But yeah,
attachment. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
but yeah, I run into it a lot, a whole lot. And I totally get to where it just fascinates me how that same mechanism in a mentally healthy person can manifest in bad ways with somebody who has the mental disorder. It's like an angel and a demon. It's like a quantum opposite that happens in both brains.
Or in some people, it's too low. Like I don't care enough about things that objectively are valuable. Well, objective value is difficult to assess, I guess, when talking about stuff like this. But I mean, I'm talking about us, like human beings. And so often I hear people say some version of like, I will take better care of myself when I care more about myself. And it's one of those vicious cycles where you got to look for the exit point. What if the act of taking better care of yourself is the mechanism for caring for yourself? Because over and over and over again, that's what I see. And that's, so people with hoarding disorder, it's maybe like it's gone to the other extreme, like you said, where it's like I care too much about this thing. But for so many people, is I don't care enough about this thing which is me, right? And then by
Yeah.
extension, things I'm responsible for, like my home and my living space. And sometimes you gotta like imposter syndrome your way through it. And I'm like regressing 15 minutes in the conversation now, but it just made me remember something you were talking about, like the guy who spite cleans, basically, right?
Yeah.
I've used a couple variations of that in therapy with people. There, you can go in one of two directions, and it depends on if you're more naturally inclined towards spite or love. So play to your strengths with this one. If you're a more spite driven person, there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's not a more I myself would align with that. It's just the way I'm wired. If you can turn whatever thoughts or impulses in your mind, like that work against you, into the manifestation of someone or something that you consider to be an enemy, it can activate that spite response in you from something you would normally align with. Like I do that with my depression, because my depression says, stay in bed, don't use your body, don't talk to people, don't think anything positive about yourself. Like all of the things it tells me to do are things that will make me more depressed if I do them. And so for a while, I'm not going to say who it was because it's personal, but I pretended that, all the thoughts come from you, right? So you hear it in your voice. The thoughts, the call is coming from inside the house, basically. And so you naturally just kind of agree with it because it's you. But I would twist it into like I would imagine that my depression was embodied by this person, and I picture their mannerisms, their tone of voice, their body language, and everything my depression said coming from them. And then suddenly I was like, well, "Screw you, guy! I'm going to go do the opposite of what you're telling me now."
I don't mean to fawn about that, but
Yeah,
that's genius. I've never thought about that in that way. I'm gonna steal that for myself. That is really cool.
I've done that with several people. It almost always ends up being a political figure, which I'm not. We're not about to veer into that territory today. But it doesn't even have to be a real person either. It can be a fictional character. I had someone use Gaston from Beauty and the Beast one time. I was like, yeah, that's a good. I don't like that guy. I definitely don't want to do what he says.
Well,
It's Go ahead. You're good.
the I found that a lot of people think of motivation as something that comes from outside you or inside you, and not kind of a combination of both, right? So there are people who look to me for motivation. They'll use my channel as body doubling, and sometimes they'll use my voice as like a motivator, a soothing motivator, or whatever. I get lots of comments about my voice. But what I found is that anybody who relies on me in real life for motivation You have to think of them in the same way that you think of employees. Employees are never, they teach you this in management, but they're never ever treated the same because they all have different personalities. So some people, in fact, most people are really, really good with saying, with you breaking it down into bite-sized chunks and making it soothing to say, we're going to clean just this. When you need a break, we're going to take a break. And in fact, when you don't need a break, we're going to take a break. But you get some people who thrive on somebody pushing them and forcing them to do it. So there are some people who need a get off your butt, we're going to go do the dishes right now sort of thing. And the reason I bring that up is because it's the same thing with yourself. Some people have that personality to where um, they need to be soothed into it or kid gloved into doing the things. And other people need a, what are you doing? Get up, get in the kitchen and run the dishwater. This is ridiculous. Some people do need that. In most cases, I found that last way that I use is more
Mhm.
harmful than helpful.
Yeah.
But there are some people who just need that.
Yeah. If your channel had existed in 2001, I probably would have used it for that too, because that's when I first moved out on my own, and I was really struggling to take care of my place, and I was really into. You'll remember this, 'cause I think we're pretty close in age. I was really into like watching NFL games at the time, and I remember it was like the first time in a month that I'd vacuumed, plugged the vacuum in, and I started vacuuming my floor, and I didn't even do it on purpose. But I remember for some reason just spontaneously hearing John Madden's voice in my head commenting on, because the cool thing about John Madden was like he was a player and a coach, right? So he was the kind of guy who could like he could you'd see a play that looked like it wasn't a big deal, and he'd zoom in on like one guy's footwork or something. He'd be like, "Look how awesome this was," and he really makes
Yeah.
you appreciate the little fundamental things that otherwise you wouldn't care about. And I remember like just spontaneously hearing the voice of John Madden in my mind saying, I can't do a John Madden impression. I'm not even going to try. So just translate it in your head appropriately. Basically saying like, man, look at those vacuum lines. He's just doing a great job right now. He's going to have this whole place clean before you know it. And it was like the silliest thing, but I was like, I actually kind of want to keep cleaning now. Like it just worked. And I think I'm the former type. Yeah, I know what you mean. There are some people who do seem to need that tough love, and it really works for them. But I agree with you. My experience as well has been. I think those people are in the minority, which
Yeah.
is unfortunate because I think that's the majority of the quote encouragement and reinforcement we receive, because that's what everyone seems to think that everybody else needs for whatever reason. And I do think
Yeah.
most of us are out here just wanting more of a gentle encourager than a taskmaster, you know?
Well, they think they're helping in a lot of cases when they're calling people lazy and stuff like that, which I get so much in my comments. I take great steps to weed them out.
Yeah.
Um, but it's kind of, especially, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but in the Midwest, we grew up in a really repressed area where that was the norm. It was people seeking to blame rather than empathize and help to understand the problem in order to fix it. So you don't get a broken engine and then just scream at it and call it a piece of junk and then it just starts working again. You have to diagnose the problem and then figure out, is there an oil filter blown? Is there a pump that's gone wrong? And then you address that. But people in my area always used to just blame, and they thought it would kind of shame the person into being better. But again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where they're just assigning punishment, and that now the people are associating cleanliness with punishment, and so it's really hard for people to get past that. Um, so I think that when they try to assign blame like that, they're trying to make themselves feel better by saying, I noticed what you did wrong and I'm going to call it out because I speak the truth, son. like, like that doesn't help anybody out at all. But that seems to be what you said. It seems to be the majority of people from the outside in seem to take that stance and say, well, if they just stop playing so many video games and get up and clean, their house would be immaculate all the time. And it's like, well, yeah, I know, but if you were to save money exactly the way I save money, you would never have money problems again.
Right.
That we're two different people. Humans aren't one-to-one comparisons.
Mhm. And
So,
I think another variable that comes into play there is you mentioned management earlier. This is technically a management principle, but in our personal lives, we're all the managers of ourselves, so we need to know how to manage efficiently. And what a lot of it, I think, comes down to is the Yerkes-Dodson law, which is the relationship between stress and performance. And so, if you think of like a graph, right? Like performance would be the vertical axis, and then stress would be the horizontal axis. And when we look at someone else, when we look at their job performance or their ability to maintain their home or whatever, we can't see their stress. We don't actually know how that person feels. All we can see is their performance. Are they doing it or not? And we tend to assume, even if we know it's not true for us, we tend to assume that the relationship between those two variables is just a simple linear. Like if you care enough, you'll do it. And therefore, if you're not doing it, that means you don't care enough. And so if I see you not doing it, I'm gonna try to make you care more about it so that you'll do it. And the fundamental
Yeah.
flaw behind that approach is that the relationship is curvilinear. It peaks in the middle. So like you do have to care. There are people out there. I think they're statistically in the minority of people who struggle with managing their environment, but there are people who just don't care. There's people who are like, I just don't care about my house. And that's fine. They have every right to, but I don't think that's the majority of the reason why people's living spaces fall into disarray. I actually think the much more common problem is that they're on the opposite end of that graph and they experience a debilitating amount of stress and pressure already. And so when an external force comes in and applies more pressure to try to get them to increase performance, it's actually pushing them further and further down that slope and making it even harder for them to get going. And I would add that anybody with a diagnosed mental illness, with probably a couple exceptions, the vast majority of mental illnesses involve people putting a pathological or disproportionate amount of pressure on themselves for every little thing in their life already. And so we don't really need any help from someone else. We already probably care. Our default is already set to care too much about stuff. And having other people pile onto that just buries us even more.
Yes, and in fact, that is something that I deal with a lot in ADHD and whenever you're dealing with oppositional defiance disorder.
Yep.
And so I get that a whole lot. Now, normally that, as you know, I don't know if the audience knows, but normally people do outgrow that. It's more of a
Mhm.
thing that happens in adolescence.
Yep.
And then, but sometimes it lingers into adulthood as a long-term disorder. And those are the people who are like, if I were to walk into a person house and say, you need to clean those dishes, the last thing they're going to do is clean those dishes. Like you've told them to, they're like, nope. Like the second you demand anything out of me, I'm not doing it. And so whenever, and I do deal with people who have that disorder a lot. And so I never, I always work with them. And it's because of them that I always work with everybody who I help. Because if I say we have to get rid of 90% of everything you own in order for this house to be safe and livable, that is a demand. And they're going to be like, no, over my dead body, you are not throwing this stuff away. But if I work with them and make it their idea, it's a totally different thing. So I can say, hey, I found this box of old National Geographic magazines, or let's not even say National Geographic because those are somewhat collectible. I found a whole bunch of magazines called Chickens, and that is real. I actually have a subscription to Chickens that somebody bought me for a joke.
Nice.
Um, do you really like? Do you have a purpose for these? Are there take which do you want the magazines, or do you value the space more? And they'll go, yeah, really, I don't need 200 chickens magazines. And so they will a lot of times say, let's go ahead and get rid of that. So they made the decision. I worked with them. I got them to the place that I wanted them to get to, and they got to a place they wanted to get to without butting heads. And so that I think that ties in with everything we talked about, even leading up to this, and that you can't just come in and assert yourself. And I don't think a lot of times people can even assert themselves on themselves. They kind of almost have to make a compromise or a deal and stop and say, all right, I'm a robot.
Mhm.
Um, which is the more valuable, the magazines or the space? Well, I've been stepping around these things for the past year. They've been on the stairs leading up to my bedroom, and I always stub my toe on them or whatever. I think it's time to go ahead and get rid of those. That's a gift to me. I'll give myself is that lack of chickens magazines.
I saw someone say, I think Chickens Magazine may have just gained several subscriptions as a result of that shout out. So you should probably become an affiliate of Chickens just to get a little bit of that headed your way.
Buy a little stock in it.
Exactly. Man, obviously we could have continued this conversation for quite a bit longer. Hate to cut it short. I do have to run because I do have a one last appointment today. But I just want to say thanks for joining me today, sharing your insights. Getting to know you has really been a pleasure. I love your channel, and
Thank you.
you're doing
Yeah.
some good work out there.
Yeah, I've been anybody from my channel. I've had a bunch of you subscribe to Dr. Eilers, and literally just like if there's a subject you're concerned about, I promise you he's got a video on there somewhere about it, and he talks exactly like I do. He makes it simple to understand, and yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again because I have a lot of fun talking to you. I think we may find that we're in the same family tree at some point if we ever do research because we're a lot alike.
Yeah, well, I mean, the light thing in particular, just there's got to be something going on there. That's just how does that even happen? I've
Yeah, I
never met
don't even.
another human being who has this light before. All right, Mac, thank you so much. I would love to do this again too. Hopefully, we can find some time to do it. Have a good day.
Absolutely.
Take care and we'll talk soon.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
too.
See you,
Later.
everybody. Bye.